Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the warm-ups for the second half of the cycle that we are currently on. Before we get started, please let me encourage you to open up to the correct warm-up packet template and to copy down the question and the answer for the questions of the day for each corresponding lesson. Remember, when you are finished, please go ahead and hit submit, and please be advised that your font is supposed to be of a different color for full credit here. Let's get started. From Monday and Tuesday's lesson, what key steps are most important in the electoral process of running and winning the office of President of the United States? So in other words, what are some of the key steps that are involved in the electoral process? For those of you guys who were here for the lesson, we basically went over some of those steps and explained more in depth what they mean and what a person must do to clinch the nomination and then go on to win the general election for President of the United States. Here are some of the steps that we went over in this lesson. So the first thing, before you run for the presidency of the United States, you should probably put together an exploratory committee that assesses your chances of running and winning. And it also looks at your popularity rating too across the country. If you are immensely popular outside of your own home state, then maybe you should consider a chance for running for president of the United States. Additionally, declaring your candidacy is also really important. This is your official announcement declaring your candidacy for public office. In many ways, this role announcement, so to speak, is really important for candidates, declaring not only their intention to run, but also their intentions to win. Entering the race is also really complicated because you have to participate in conferences, debates, forums against members of your own party. And in some cases, for some politicians, these are like your best friends that you've had for many years in public life and public service. So the race sometimes can be heavily contested, and the election itself can be very heated. Additionally, you have to engage in the primary season by winning as many different caucuses and primaries as possible. In the different states, you have to travel from state to contest to woo over the hearts, minds, and votes of voters themselves to win the nomination. In doing so, by the way, the more primaries you win, the more delegates you win, and the more delegates you win, the closer you get to clinching the nomination. That's the next step here, by the way. You essentially clinch the nomination for your party at the National Convention. When this happens, this of course is a mass meeting of party elites and also delegates from across the country who come to certify the election results for your nomination for President of the United States. You also, ahead of the convention, typically will probably pick a vice presidential candidate to then later be approved at the convention. Once you have your party's nomination and blessing to move forward, then of course the general election begins. This is a one-on-one match against the member of the other party, the top of their ticket, to participate in debates. Typically, there are 3 presidential debates, by the way, travel the country, and of course, participate in plenty of events that are just so many, and you have a packed schedule. The more exposure you have, of course, the better, in theory, your chances are of winning the hearts and minds of voters. Again, down here, winning the Electoral College is also really important. On election night, typically there might be a projected winner. However, later on, after the fact, it is the Electoral College, which is the group of electors who certifies the election results before you are officially inaugurated for President of the United States. So this is often the step that most students forget about. However, it's really important, and we will talk more about the complexities of the Electoral College later. So there you go. Moving on here, we have the question of the day for Thursday and Friday. What interesting factors and dynamics affected the primary election season of the 2020 presidential election? So in other words, while you guys type this question, in this lesson, we looked at the first half of the electoral process from exploratory committees all the way to and through, I believe, Super Tuesday and trying to win your nomination for your party. So what are some of the things that impacted the 2020 presidential race for the Democrats last election cycle? Here are some of the things that happened. So the first thing here is we have to talk about President Trump. Now, even though he's not a Democrat, he was in fact the presumptive nominee well before he even announced his re-election bid. Trump was actually heavily popular with his base, but however, his national popularity never peaked more than 50% nationwide. So that was quite interesting here. Even though he was incredibly iconic with his own base, his appeal to moderates and independents was somewhat up in the air. And so many people tried to chip away at those voters and thought that they had a chance. So the challengers entered the race. This past year, we saw arguably the most diverse and eclectic field of Democratic challengers ever, like in the history of American politics. We're talking about like 20 plus iconic Democrats who are vying for the chance to take on Donald Trump in a one-on-one general election matchup. Over time, however, with the caucuses coming to form, this would prove to be somewhat of a complicated road. When the Iowa caucuses did finally happen in late January, I believe, this was problematic due to an issue with a tech error in the app that they were using. There was no clear winner for the Iowa caucuses, although Pete Buttigieg did claim that he won the caucuses fair and square. The primary election seasons themselves were somewhat drawn out as well. There were different winners and losers all across the primary elections in different states. For example, Joe Biden didn't actually gain traction until he finally won South Carolina, and when many people actually did drop out of the race. Some other names that you might remember from the early primary season are Amy Klobuchar, Tulsi Gabbard, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris too, before she became Biden's running mate, Elizabeth Warren, and of course Bernie Sanders. So, speaking of Sanders, there was actually a split that was becoming more noticeable between Democrats, between who should be the right nominee to take on Trump. Many people were wondering whether or not the safe option here was Joe Biden. He was a moderate, and he could probably appeal to the most voters in the middle of the political spectrum. However, some Democrats said it's time for dramatic and radical change, and so many Democrats are advocating for Bernie Sanders to clinch the nomination. Over time, however, on the issues, several issues combined to form trouble for the Democrats. Trump was acquitted, and he was not impeached or removed by the Senate. And of course, the economy was relatively good pre-COVID, and Trump's foreign policy victories proved to be helpful for his re-election bid. So Democrats, of course, had to make the case that they were in fact more justified for the victory and for the office of president. Now, the pandemic itself has greatly changed the way that the electoral process went down as well. This impacted their campaign approaches and voter outreach, and so in many ways, the primary election season was heavily altered by those dynamics that we just talked about on this slide. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the pandemic too. So there you have it. Those are the key points for the questions of the day for this part of the warm-up packet cycle. Remember to please go ahead and fill out the rest of your template, make sure it is fully finished, and then hit submit on Google Classroom. Thank you so much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of the warm-up packet tab.